this morning. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for the first of our live sessions for Comms by the Coast. Really excited that we've got Rosie with us this morning from Organised Fun, who are the student opportunities specialists. I absolutely recommend going and checking out all the great stuff they do because they are super smart. So Rosie's going to chat through this idea of recreating relationships, not formats. And she's, like I said, super smart and got loads of stuff to blow your minds with this morning. There's a few bits that we've got in our webinar today that give you access to different things. So what you can do is at the bottom of your screen, you should have a Q&A button that lets you submit your questions. You can upvote other people's questions, and Rosie will be going through those at the end. There's also a chat box. Now, you'll want to make sure, if you want to everyone, that you switch it to make sure it's going to all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, just me and Rosie can see, which is nice. If you've got secrets, we'd love to hear them. But if you switch it to all panelists and attendees, everyone will be able to see what you write in the chat box. We are recording this session and it will be available on the event website at some point. We've got quite a lot of talks to get through and upload, so bear with us if it's not up straight away. And you can chat in the chat box here or on the event website in the comments. And if you are on social media chatting about this, you can use the SUComms hashtag. But anyway, let me hand over to Rosie, who is going to blow your mind with her great information. Thanks, Rosie, over to you.
Cool, no pressure. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. I very much appreciate it. As Joe said, I'm going to talk to you about relationships, not formats, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about what that actually means in a second. Joe's done all of the lovely housekeeping stuff. Please do ask questions and we'll get through as many as we can. And if there's any that we don't get time to pick up in the session, then I'll keep an eye on the hashtag afterwards and I'll check out Twitter. So if you want to kind of carry on chatting about this, or if indeed we do blow minds in this session and you're like, that was controversial, join in the chat on Twitter afterwards. That will be lovely. I love a bit of controversial chat. Normally, I do nice, easy, fun, non-controversial topics. And today, most of the session is that. But I'm going to tell you why I don't think you need a freshers fair, which I know is going to make some people squirm. But it's not that I hate freshers fairs. I love freshers fairs. I'm from student opportunities background. Of course, I love freshers fairs. I just don't think you need one this year. And so the big example that we'll talk about in terms of relationships, not formats, will be freshers fair, which is exciting. I am Rosie. I'm the founder of Organised Fun. Organised Fun, we specialise in student opportunities, so that's clubs, societies, student volunteering, fundraising, student media, all the fun stuff, hence why we're called Organised Fun. I have a conversation often with my business partner and partner, Jamie, who does all of our operational side of Organised Fun, about whether Organised Fun is the right name, because it's often sort of the cringy stuff. So like, oh, great, Organised Fun. But I'm owning that statement and that's fine. That is what we do in opportunities and it is great. But Organised Fun, we do consultancy. So part of our work is around consultancy. So we help students' unions, colleges, universities, sometimes charities, sometimes voluntary sector organisations to be really good at driving impactful student opportunities, whether that's like charities doing fundraising activities with student fundraisers and rags, or helping a students' union to suss out how to do student development really well. Lots of kind of different, quite bespoke projects. And then the other part of our work is around community. So we want to support the people involved in student opportunities, whether that's a student volunteer that's just joined a society, or whether that's a staff professional that's been in the student movement for years, or sabbatical officers in the middle. We want there to be a home for those people. So our consultancy work helps to kind of build things individually with students' unions, and then our community work is for everybody. It's free usually, or at least very, very cheap to access. The biggest example of that is a couple of weeks ago we ran the Student Opportunities Festival, and then a few months before that we supported the delivery of the National Societies and Volunteering Awards. So that's the kind of stuff that we like to do. And then we like doing stuff like this. So we love talking about anything to do with students' unions. And really happy to be here today. Thanks, Jo, for having me and for having us as an organisation. So yeah, that's a bit of introduction for you. Let's go into what we're going to talk about today. So I'll do a little bit of intro about what I mean by relationships, not formats. Then we'll talk about how to design activities based on impact and based on what you want them to achieve, because I think often that isn't what we do, because we get swept up in a cool idea and then work backwards. So I'm going to encourage you to work forwards. Then we'll talk about why I don't think you need a freshers fair. And then we're going to talk about bums on seats, or people sitting at their computers watching stuff and getting involved in digital activities. And that's today's session. I think it will take about 40 minutes, but depends on the questions, depends on how much I ramble on and go off on tangents. And as I said before, if we've got any questions that we can't get through, we'll have a chat on Twitter afterwards. I hope that's okay, and that's what you're all expecting today. I'm a bit nervous because normally I talk to opportunities people, and a lot of you are commsy people, which is exciting, but be nice to me, because I'm not a comms specialist. Let's do the first bit. So what do I mean about relationships, not formats? Where's this session come from? So if you are kind of following 25 Dots and follow Jo, you'll know that a few months ago, Jo and Andrew Keenan from SU Skills and us did a programme called Welcome 2020. So we worked with 10 students' unions really closely and looked at the kind of problem of this welcome coming up that we've got. So the freshers welcome period, where we bring all of our students in and we welcome new students and we welcome back our returning students. And because of the pandemic, that's going to be really different this year. And lots of student unions were sort of freaking out about that, rightly, because there were so many question marks. And in Welcome 2020, we worked with these student unions and we talked about lots and lots of different things. And one of the kind of resounding themes that came out of that programme was this kind of relationships, not formats idea. So I read an article, so I was looking up actually about freshers fairs and about what other industries are doing in terms of fairs. So trade fairs, art shows, that kind of stuff. Because I'm thinking, okay, well, let's look outside. Let's look outside of the student movement. And in doing that, I found this wonderful article that I've got a link to at the end. So when you get these slides, I'll share them later. There's a links page, and in the links page, you can read the article yourself. And it's quite long, but the kind of resounding message from that was, in doing any of this stuff, we're not recreating a format, because we can't necessarily recreate a format. We can't have club nights right now. So let's not try and recreate that format exactly. What we need to do is recreate the relationships that happen at that event or during that activity or because of that activity. And that, I think, is a really important lesson for us in students' unions, particularly going forward in the pandemic and having to do things quite differently to how we've done them before. So that's kind of where this has come from. In terms of like our role in this, I think student unions have a really important role to play in providing social experiences, places for people to meet each other, to make connections. And I think a lot of the time we're sort of seen a little bit like the university's social secretary. And whilst that's not fundamentally a problem, I think it kind of belittles the work that we do in students' unions, because we don't just put on nice parties. We create friendships for life. We help people to meet their future employer. We help people to find themselves. And we help people to form the support networks that are incredibly important to them. If you haven't checked it out before, I encourage you to have a look at Wonky, Only the Lonely research that they did last year. I think it was last year, it might have even been the year before. Anyway, it's very good. And there's a nice summary paper. Again, I've got a link to that at the end of the session. And in that, it's one of the kind of first pieces of research that's been related to student opportunities for a really long time. And there were some really interesting findings from there. So they found that doing student activities helps students to feel less lonely, which I think we all knew anecdotally, but having that evidence to show that was really, really helpful. They also said that students want to engage in different ways. So they don't necessarily want to engage with activities that they have to join that are more formal. And they don't necessarily want to have that long-term commitment. It's quite a lot more in terms of that try before you buy and dip in and out of things. So I think it kind of signals a shift from long-term volunteering opportunities that require like sustained commitment to more sort of taster type things. Similarly with societies, I think societies still work really well for lots of different interest groups and for different communities. But I think what we need to be doing, and I know lots of students' unions are already doing this, is thinking about how you can support students to just come together in a less formal way, where you don't need a committee and a constitution, but they're still supported and it's still safe. So that's really interesting. And I think that particular point is so important in the current situation, because some of those formalities that we're so used to aren't going to work so well when we're going online or when we're doing kind of blended stuff. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on too. And then the final thing that I took from Only the Lonely that's relevant to this session today is that we pour a lot of energy, we pour a lot of money, we pour a lot of staff time, we pour a lot of emphasis into that welcome period. And sometimes for you as student unions, normally, so outside of pandemic times, that kind of falls into a 2-week, 3-week period of really heavy activity, exhaustion at the end, lots of coffee drank, because you're just at it day after day after day after day, engaging with students and doing really intense activity, putting things on like fairs and welcome events and that kind of stuff. The Only the Lonely research said that actually students don't necessarily want it all to be at that kind of front end, that they'd prefer to be able to join stuff all year, they'd prefer to be able to get involved with stuff all year. And I think we knew this anyway, and it was something that a lot of you have been thinking about anyway, about how do you encourage sign-ups to clubs and societies, for example, outside of the freshers window? How do you get people to know about the SU outside of the freshers window? And so I think that's a really important lesson, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of that stuff as we go through the session. So hopefully that all makes sense. Let's go on to talk about purpose-driven activities. So one of the other kind of themes from the Welcome programme that Andrew and Joe and I came up with was, and this isn't a new thing, and I'm sure a lot of you will know about it already, but starting with why. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to find it, and I have a link for it at the end. You're getting a theme here. All the links are at the end. There's a really good video by an American, I suppose he's an influencer, business leader called Simon Sinek. And he he does a TED talk basically about how to sell. So he's talking about sales, and he's talking about start with why and then work out from there. And a lot of the time inside student unions, everywhere, you see things that don't necessarily really land so well, because they're talking about the what or the how rather than the why. So, and we'll talk about this in a bit more depth when I'm talking about Freshers Fair particularly. But I think what often happens in student unions, particularly when working with student groups, is oh, we want to put on a fashion show. Okay, great. So we're going to have models, and we're going to get some sustainable fashion companies, and we're going to have it in this venue, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. Okay, great, cool, let's do that. Let's do the risk assessment for it. Let's book the venue. Let's work with the team. Let's have meetings. Let's do social media. Tell people about it. All that stuff that we know is involved in planning an activity. But often we miss the why. We miss that first crucial question, which is actually about impact. So for I'm sure a lot of you have to talk about impact daily. Like, what impact is this having? And the easiest way, I think, to do that is to start with why. So for this fashion show, why are we putting on a fashion show? Is it because I mentioned sustainable fashion? Is it that we want to help the student body to see that the fashion industry is actually quite bad for the planet, and that we want people to see that like upcycling is a thing, and recycling and vintage and making your own clothes? Is it a sustainability message that's the purpose of our fashion show? Is it a fundraiser? Is it that you want to put on a cool event that people will come to because they'll pay a ticket fee and that will make money? Perhaps. And there's hundreds of whys, hundreds and hundreds of them. And I think that whatever you're putting on and whatever you're planning for your welcome period and whatever you're working with your students to plan for welcome, have a look at those and see if you can answer the why for those activities. Why are we putting this on? And there's nothing wrong with putting on an activity that is for fun, that is to help people connect with others and make friends. But just think really carefully about that and whether that is enough, or and how you're then going to make that. Because if it's a quiz, and I know everybody's done quizzes a lot this past kind of quarter, this past few months. If you're doing a quiz because you know how to do a quiz and you've got a gap on the Thursday of your welcome period, and let's do a quiz, and your why is it'll help people make friends, but everybody does it individually from home, alone potentially, or with their housemates, or it's like socially distanced, so it's in a big space that you've got available to you. Are they actually going to make friends through doing that? Maybe, but think carefully about how you're then going to enact that why. Yeah. So that's talking about purpose. And here's a slide with some whys on it to help me to remind you about this why thing. The other thing to say on the why is that often it's really easy to get carried away around that, like, that would be cool. I do it all the time. I'm like, I really want to do that. And then you actually like drill it back to, why do you want to do that? Not sure. Is it actually worth it? So for example, I'm desperate to make merch, but there's absolutely no point in Organised Fun having merch, because as much as I like our logo, I don't think anybody else will wear an Organised Fun t-shirt. And I really want to be able to send people things in the post and be like, look, post, because I like getting post. But when you drill back to that why around, why are we doing it? Why are we spending money on it? Why are we going to send people stuff in the post? It's hard to find a reason. And so that's why you haven't all had some Organised Fun t-shirts in the post, because there isn't a reason for doing that. It's just that would be nice, that would be fun. Yeah. Okay, so this big controversial topic, you don't need a freshers fair, and I'll tell you why you don't need a freshers fair. For those of you that have a virtual freshers fair being planned, that's fine, and particularly that's fine if your institution has invested in it. I've been talking to lots of SUs recently where the institution has invested in a virtual platform for you to have a virtual fair, and I think that's okay. Like, that's fine. I wouldn't choose to invest in a virtual platform because I think if you're making the investment as a student union, they're not that cheap, and it's another platform for you to have to train your student groups on, and it's another platform that's new to students. So They, for those that are returning, they're used to the in-person Freshers' Fair, so they're kind of more used to the format of a Freshers' Fair. And so therefore they might kind of have a better understanding if you turn that online and make it virtual and recreate that format of a Freshers' Fair. But for those that are new, they haven't been to a Freshers' Fair, probably. They might have seen an imitation of one on a film, or they might have seen photos of one. And it is definitely like a stalwart of a Freshers' period, like having that fair. And it's definitely something that people are interested in having. I think the thing with the virtual fair is that it's hard to get right and it takes a lot of investment. So if you're at the point now where you're going, should we invest in a virtual fair? Should we not? I would propose that you don't need to. But if you are having one, I'm not saying, get your money back and stop, because that will probably cause more problems than it's worth. But the thing with the Freshers' Fair, and the reason that this is such an important part of this session, is that what you're doing in creating a virtual fair is you are creating that format. The relationships that you're going to be trying to form through that virtual fair can happen, but need thinking about. So if you are doing a virtual fair, think about how a student is going to sort of like have a wander around that space and see things. Are they just going to go, okay, I'm a history student, I know I need to join the History Society. I used to be involved with the History Society, which is why I always use that as an example. Am I going to go and like search in the virtual platform History Society and then find it? In which case, I probably could have done that on the SU website, and you don't necessarily need that fair platform to do that. If you're going to have a virtual platform, spend time thinking about different people's journeys through that online space and how they're going to incidentally find stuff that's interesting. Because a Freshers' Fair isn't just about joining clubs and societies, as much as it's a really important part of it. Here's some of the whys for a fair. And I keep calling it a Freshers' Fair, but I know a lot of you are calling it a welcome fair now. And I think it's probably better use of language to call it a welcome fair, because Freshers' Fair signals that it's only for first year students, and we all know that's not true. So I know a lot of you are moving to kind of the welcome fair narrative now. So I'll keep reminding myself to call it a welcome fair. Why do we have one? Why do we have a welcome fair? We have a welcome fair so that people can join clubs and societies, they can join volunteering programs, they can find out about student media, they can find out about volunteering and fundraising and all of the kind of organised fun stuff, all of the student opportunities, and they can sign up to those. Also, a fair is about making them aware of the stuff that they might not initially be like know that they need, like advice, or know that they're interested in getting involved with, like student voice campaigning, course reps, that kind of stuff. So a lot of the time students go because they know that's where you find out about the different stuff you can do, but then they see instantly that, oh yeah, the SU supports me, the SU has my back, the SU is the place I can go to have my voice heard and to like lead that work. So it's a really useful opportunity for doing that. Also, it's a place where SUs can earn some commercial income. You can cover the costs of the fair through that. You can make extra profit because of that. I'm not going to talk about that in loads of detail because I am not a sales specialist, and the Comms by the Coast has partnered with this new sales fest, and I know that there's lots of sessions talking about media sales and commercial sales and sponsorships. But I think you can do that in other ways too. A fair is also about finding friends and finding support networks. And this is where I think that we put too much emphasis on the fair anyway. And I think you can do that in other ways. So students go and find stuff that they find interesting and join it and try it out. But they can do that in other ways. The final reason, and maybe the reason that it entices lots of students, it's definitely the thing that a lot of them talk about, is the free stuff. So you go and you get your tote bag that may be from the SU, then you get some Domino's pizza, then you get loads of free pens, you get snacks, you get vouchers for things, you get free stuff from clubs and societies, and you come away with loads of merch, basically, that you didn't know you needed, and that's ever so helpful. I still have a wooden spatula that I was given at Freshers' Fair by Wilco's at Swansea University in 2007. There you go. How helpful was that spatula? And they had loads of them. So I think I took about 4. So it's probably not the same spatula. But anyway, wooden spatula, very useful gift. But all of this stuff can happen in different ways. And I'm going to talk now about why those things are a bit dodgy. So I think that there's too many red flags in a fair, and these are the 3 things that I think are the kind of top red flags, but there's loads. Free pens aren't a thing anymore. So I know a lot of people, I've been having this conversation too, is what do we do? Do we have hand sanitizer on every stand? And then every time anybody touches the pile of free pens, we have to hand sanitize the pens and disinfect the pens. Then if everybody also has hand sanitizer on them, then they can disinfect themselves too. It's all, in my opinion, too risky and not worth it. You go to the shops and there's hand sanitizer stations around the shops. I was in Morrison's yesterday and there was hand sanitizer at the fruit and veg, there's hand sanitizer in the milk, like not in the milk, next to the milk. That would be gross. So you can hand sanitize. The difference there is that going food shopping is essential. Getting food is important and essential. A Freshers' Fair or a welcome fair is not essential. And what we're doing in even having the conversation about giving out free pens is putting people at an unnecessary risk, because free pens aren't so important that we should be investing hundreds of pounds in hand sanitizer to disinfect the free pens. There are other ways of doing freebies, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Is there even enough space? So we're in a real interesting position right now where the government are kind of letting universities and colleges do their own thing, but not. So they're giving some advice, some guidance, and making some things okay and allowed, but then also leaving a whole heap of stuff really vague. And this is an issue because at the moment, university teams and college teams are trying to work out, where is the teaching going to happen if we're not doing online teaching? Where are we going to put people? And a lot of those big spaces that you've got are going to be used for teaching. Now, whether that's the right decision or not is for another conversation. But have you even got enough space to have a socially distant, safe fair? So let's imagine for a second, just draw this out if you've got a piece of paper, or imagine it if you're that kind of person. You've got, let's just say, 10 clubs and societies. So you're going quite small. 10 clubs and societies. So a normal stall is about 2 meters long. So you could have one person on that stall and then have a gap in between, and then another person on the next stall, and that's 10. I can't even work out the meterage that's needed to make sure that everybody's safe, but it's a very big space. If you're drawing it out, I'm sure someone is more mathematical than me and can work out the space needed for 10 societies with a 2 meter stall and a space in between. Then imagine on the little diagram that you've then got to make sure that whoever is having a conversation with that person on that stall is 2 meters away. Maybe the government by then will say that 1 meter is okay. If I was putting on a Freshers' Fair, I'd be keeping it 2 meters, because I'm not sure that the government's advice is always in our best interest. So let's say 2 for now. Maybe it's 1 by then, but let's say 2. So you've got someone standing at a stall, and then 2 meters away, you've got somebody talking to you. Number 1, it's not the kind of nice, warm conversation that we normally get at our fairs, because they're 2 meters away, which I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but if you go into your town, see someone you know and stand 2 meters away and have a conversation, or if you have somebody in your garden and you sit 2 meters away, feels a bit awkward. And I don't think that's conducive to good, warm environment that's going to make people want to sign up to things. And it's also unnecessary because they can sign up in other ways. So you've got two people 2 meters away. Then let's think about your volunteer duty of care. So all of the people who are involved in your student opportunities and all of your staff who are running services and telling people about the Students' Union. So regardless of your volunteer duty of care, there's a staff duty of care. But for your volunteers, because that's the bit that I know the best, all of your student leaders who you would be asking to be involved in this fair, you're responsible for their health and safety because they're one of your volunteers. You're then going to put them in an environment where there is more risk. And you're also going to have to work out a way of doing timetabling so that you've not got one volunteer standing for 4 or 5 hours or even sitting for 4 and 5 hours on their own at a stall. If you then introduce 2 committee members per stall, you've then got to have, unless they're housemates and they already live together and can be together, you've got to have one here and then one 2 meters away. And then what you have, like 2 dots marked on the floor for the talking to that society space. I just think it's going to be awkward. And then the final thing on this kind of too many red flags thing is that Joe, as in this Joe, did a really interesting article about what we are able to do, what we're willing to do, and what we're willing, able, and there's another one. Can't remember the other one. But anyway, the point of this is that lots of people won't be able to be in that space because, one, they are shielding or they're with a family member that's shielding, so they can't put themselves in that much risk. 2, they don't feel comfortable to, so maybe they're able to and they're allowed to do it, but they don't want to, they're not willing to because they don't feel safe, or perhaps they've lost a family member to coronavirus and their risk level is higher. Maybe they're just a worrier and it's just not worth it for them. So I think there's too many red flags to justify having a Freshers' Fair in person. And I think that a lot of you are being put under pressure by your institutions to have a Freshers' Fair because, one, people can't see the alternative and see that there's other ways to do the things that a fair does. 2, people are thinking that it's all going to be okay by then, and I think that's unlikely. And 3, people just don't know any different and they're thinking we have to have a Freshers' Fair, otherwise the Freshers' experience, the welcome experience, is no good. I think that there's enough in these 3 things that I've just talked you through, and there's more red flags to justify not doing one. And I'm happy to have a conversation in a few minutes when I finish up with my content about if people have kind of counter arguments to these things, because I think there are some, but for me, I don't think it's worth it. So if, let's say, you're convinced and you're not going to do one, what can you do instead? And there's lots and lots of different options for things you can do instead. So I'm just going to talk through a couple of examples. So in terms of freebies, this one's kind of obvious, but you can do voucher codes. You can do free stuff that they can redeem online. You can do stuff that's sent to people's houses. Also on the free stuff thing, it's a huge sustainability problem in terms of just kind of like printing loads of stuff, printing loads of plastic pens. So a lot of students' unions are already thinking about freebies from a sustainability perspective. But I think also students aren't as kind of naive and consumeristic as we think they are. If there's a decision around freebies from you as a students' union that's agreed with your institution, that you're not going to do them because of coronavirus, and that you communicate that positively and confidently, people will be okay with that. If they really need free pens, there's other ways to get free pens. And if they really need that free pizza, there's other ways to get that free pizza. So voucher codes, send stuff to them, or do your freebies in a different way. Do discounts for later on in the year, for example, for the union shop, or for merch, or for stationery, if that's the thing that they need. Talking about how student groups can promote themselves, could do a whole 2 hours on this easily. Joe did a really good session at the Student Opportunities Festival for student groups that's on YouTube, and we've got a link to that. So that if you want to share that with your student groups about how they can promote themselves on social media and using different technology, then that's a really good tip. I think if I were in a student union, I'd be leaning hard on Give It a Go. So if you haven't done Give It a Go before, it's basically a try before you buy type thing where you encourage your student groups to put on a taster activity that's free, and then, or very, very cheap if it has to cost money. And then people can have a go at doing that without having joined that society or student group or volunteering program. I would extend your Give It a Go program to make it kind of 2 or 3, maybe even 4 weeks, maybe do it for a month, so that there's lots of opportunities for people to attend stuff and get involved. I would also encourage your student groups to test a couple of different Give It a Go type activities. So, for example, if you're a drama society, you can't necessarily meet to rehearse together in the same space, but maybe what you can do is do like a Zoom improvisation session. And then but what you could do is some sort of like outdoor like read through, or you could do some rehearsals outdoor. So maybe if you'll Give It a Go, you do both of those things and you do an outdoor, like socially distanced, like different kind of drama activities, and then you do an online Zoom improv session to give people a taste of different types of things that they can get involved with. And maybe you do a social as well that's just a fun activity that's for meeting people who are interested in drama, and that you like talk, maybe you do like a film showing online, or you do like a watch party. Different activities from the same group to show the different ways of doing stuff, and to give people an example of the type of activities they could expect to get if they're a member. When we're talking about clubs and societies particularly, lots of the people who I talk to come back and ask, can I charge? Like, can our groups charge for these activities if it's going to be really different? The short answer is yes, but you need to make a conscious decision about that. And the longer answer is, I'm doing a session tomorrow at SU20 Digital, which is the conference that's running alongside Comms by the Coast and Sales Fest, about to charge or not to charge, and how you can justify that decision and what things you need to think through in order to make that decision. You can charge, you just need to think about it carefully. Student groups can also promote themselves through their videos, through websites, through drop-in sessions, loads and loads of different ways of doing things. In terms of your commercial income, I said I'm not going to talk too much about that because I'm not a specialist in commercial sales and that kind of stuff. In terms of friends and connections, so making friends, finding that support network, I think as student unions, you can be really creative about the type of activities that you put on. And this is where that kind of thing, going back to relationships, not formats, is really important. So thinking about the different ways that people can connect with each other, meet people, cement friendships that they may have already formed through a different type of activity. And a lot of this can be done really cleverly online. Some of it can be done socially distanced as well, but you can rely heavily on online and it will all be okay. I did a session at Student Ops Fest, which again is linked at the end, called 101 Online Event Ideas. So you can watch the recording for that. That video has been designed to be shared with student leaders, so it's totally accessible for them. And there's literally 101 ideas of things that you could run online as interesting, fun events. So I'm not going to go through all of those now because that was a whole other session, but there are loads and loads of ways of helping to form those connections and form those relationships outside of that kind of traditional Freshers' Fair format or the formats that we're used to seeing in the Welcome programme. So how do you get bums on seats or names on screens if you're doing digital stuff? Again, the event session that I ran the other day talks about this in loads more detail, but I think you can break it down into before, during and after. And often we focus on the during. We focus on like what's going to actually happen at the event or at the activity or in the space that you've created for people to connect with each other. But the before and the after is just as important too. So before, your comms people. So I'm not going to tell you how to do jobs, but telling people about it in different ways is really important. And in terms of inclusivity and making people feel welcome and making people feel like that space is for them, making the expectations on that activity really clear. So for example, if it's a Zoom social, telling people whether they can just drop in, or whether if they just drop in, they'll miss the start and then they won't be able to understand what's going on. So telling people a start time, or whether people can just drop in and join, or whether that is like the cemented start time. Telling people about the format of it. So it will be in a Zoom meeting. So you can choose to put your camera on or not. You can choose to have sound on or not, or you can just watch and listen. Telling people that kind of stuff this is important whether we're doing online or offline, and it's particularly important for offline activities when you're meeting up in person, to be able to tell people how you're going to keep them safe. During there's loads and loads of advice in that event session, but basically thinking about being a good host. So think about an airline member of staff. What do? They make you feel safe and they make you feel welcome, and that's your job at activities. And then after, this is the bit that I think we often neglect. Once someone's attended something, whether it's a society social or an SU event, or it's some kind of meet and greet or something like that, how are you going to cement that friendship? How are you going to cement that relationship? Make sure you say thank you to them for coming. Give them opportunities for feedback. Please don't do a feedback form for absolutely every single activity that you do, because you'll never stop analysing that feedback because you'll have so much. But giving people opportunities to suggest things for the future, or to tell you what was good, tell you what could have been better about it, that kind of stuff's really important. And yeah, final thing from me, and then I'll get through some questions. In terms of encouraging and supporting your student activity groups to do stuff, I think that you have a role to play in giving them some ideas. So use the event session that I made a few weeks ago. Give them ideas for things that they can do. Show them. So don't just give them a list, but perhaps in August you put on a couple of socials that are different formats to show your student groups how they can create interesting online activities. Also gives you a test run ready for welcome period. Give them that encouragement. Tell them that you want them to do it and that it would be good, but also give them permission. Tell them what they can use, what formats they can use, i.e. like you've got a Zoom account, or they can use Hangouts, or they can do it in a different way, and then motivate them to do these different activities. That's a summary of what I've talked about. And here's the links list. So I'll share these slides later. I'll share them with Jo so she's got them, but also I'll share them online. So there's some of the stuff I talked about. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, or ideas before we wrap up?
So you've got a great question, Rosie.
Great.
It's anonymous, so we don't know which university it is, but one university is has told the union that students will choose whether or not to defer or go to a different uni based on whether there's a fare.
Whew.
So yeah, students would rather defer or go to a different uni than somewhere that has an online fare or no fare at all. So students are planning their entire, I'm sorry, I'm adding my own editorial slant to this question, because yeah, their entire 3 or whatever years will be based on whether or not they can stand in a room with a table and a stranger. What's your opinion of this, and do you have any insight?
Well, without swearing, I don't think that's very good. That's a shame, a real shame. I think that's kind of spurred me on, that I think that there's some content that we can put out as SU people to help students to be like, you're not going to have a bad time at university or college if you don't have a fare, and you're not going to have a bad time if some of your activities are going to be online in the first term. You're still going to make those connections and form friends. If it's your institution that's like spreading that message, then I'd give them a hard challenge, particularly based on this session, and give them some of the reasons why you don't need to have a fare to do all this stuff. It's really surprising, but yeah, I think it's silly.
And I think, from a comms point of view as well, going back to that why, it's making sure that the university understands, we've got ways to help students get involved in activities. We've got ways to help them. It's that relationship, not the format. So I think making sure that universities know that, but also students, and because I think I've seen research that says one of the things that students are looking at and one of the things they're worried about is what Freshers Week will be like. So I think there is an element of truth in there, and that we have a role to reassure them. So as comms people, we can think about how can we put that reassurance out. And for me, one of the ways I usually, in a normal year, I like an air of mystery. I like some secrets. I like tension. I like kind of, wait, and then you make big announcements. Whereas this year, I'm going the completely opposite way and being very transparent about what's going on so that people get that reassurance. So I think, I added on some extra sarcasm that perhaps wasn't completely merited. But I think that's a bit questionable. And then another question, do you agree with the messaging that everyone will experience a freshers fair at some point during their time at university?
Do I agree with it? Well, I mean, it's not necessarily going to be true, is it? Because you
I mean, and have you been talking to people who are looking at moving a fair, so doing an in-person fair later?
So there's lots of talk about doing one in January when we would traditionally do kind of refreshes stuff. I think that's fine. I would plan to also have to cancel that because we really don't know what's going to happen with this pandemic, but I wouldn't promise it. And I think in terms of that statement of, do you agree with saying that? No, because I don't think that anybody can promise anything at the moment. None of us realised that any of this was going to be happening, and we don't know what's going to happen next. So I don't agree with telling people that. What I would change that narrative to is you will get a warm welcome experience. You will get to meet people. You will get to join activities and do activities. Will you get a freshers fair? Maybe, maybe not. But we all know that I don't think it's absolutely essential.
And so you've talked as well about ideas for events, and you're linking that, and I will make sure that everyone can access this stuff via the event website. But perhaps a final question before we wrap up comes from Molly at Sussex, who says, so we're doing this great event. We've, our groups have got really fantastic, really popular online events, but then how can we help them manage that if there's lots of people? So 100 people turn up to the Hockey Women Zoom watch along. How can we help build friendships in those kind of sort of mass environments?
Okay, so I think a couple of tips. One, don't just have one person as your moderator and host. So even in this space, Joe's here to support with questions and to talk about stuff in the chat and to make sure it's recording properly and to do the techie stuff. So I can just concentrate on telling you and talking to you about the stuff that I've prepared to talk to you about. So it's exactly the same if you're a society, and that you've got a committee for a reason. So have a few people doing different stuff and having somebody that, or a couple of people that are hosting and bringing some energy and some vibes. Have a couple of people who are on the chat. Someone can pick up on individual questions. So if you've got someone who's just being like, oh, this is boring, this is rubbish, the instinct is to boot them out of that Zoom call and be like, well, you're negative, get out. But actually, if you were at an in-person event and you could see that someone wasn't having the best time, you would probably pull them to one side, have a chat with them and try and work out if there was something you could do to make it better. Doing a social online shouldn't be any different. So getting someone from the committee to chat to them about what's going on, talk to them about suggestions for the future. Sometimes people are just having a bad day and they don't want to be there and they want to go, and that's fine. But doing that, and then use the tools that you've got. So if you know that your event is going to be, or your activity is going to be better with 20 to 30 people, then ticket it and have it limited so that you can assure people that they're going to have a positive experience, and then just do it a few times. If you've got that demand, put a waiting list on, and if you get demand for another one, put it on again. If you know it's going to be massive, use Zoom meetings where you can do breakout rooms and put people in different spaces and then have someone facilitating. So use the tools you've got and try and this is all about your planning, and I haven't talked about it today, but your risk management, because your risks aren't just, oh no, what if we get a hacker? Your risks are also what happens if someone has a bad time. So doing your risk management properly and thinking about what's the worst thing that could happen in this session and what could go wrong, and then how do we mitigate against that happening. And that's the same whether it's an in-person or online activity.
Cool. Well, thank you ever so much, Rosie, for that. We'll make sure that you can access all the slides via the event website, and the recording will be up soon as well. So yeah, thank you very much, Rosie, and I look forward to seeing you all at some of the other sessions this week.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.